In this video, we will explore the individuals who were executed in February, examining their crimes, last words, and the last meals they requested before facing their fate. Marion Bowman, State of South Carolina, February 16, 2001, at 20 years old, Marion Bowman had a heated argument with 21-year-old Candy Louise Martin over a debt, which escalated into violence when Bowman shot Martin multiple times in a wooded area. Afterward, he dragged her body, placed it in the trunk of a car, and set it on fire. Hours before the crime, he had threatened Martin, saying, "You'll be dead before nightfall." His cousin, James Taiwan Gatson, testified against him, claiming to have witnessed the crime and that Bowman had planned it. The weapon was later recovered from a river and linked to the crime through ballistic and DNA tests. Despite maintaining his innocence, Bowman was sentenced to death in 2002, asserting that crucial evidence was concealed and that racism played a role in his conviction. The day before his execution, Bowman requested a last meal of fried seafood, wings, chicken strips, onion rings, banana pudding, German chocolate cake, and cranberry pineapple juice. On January 31, 2025, he was executed by lethal injection. As the curtain opened in the execution chamber, he briefly looked at his attorney and then the ceiling before closing his eyes. When asked for his last words, Bowman said, "Death row inmates may be labeled as the worst, but we've all changed since that moment that cost us everything. I know Candy's family suffers, and rightfully so. They're angry. If my death brings them some relief, then I guess it will have served some purpose. I hope they find peace." Stephen Lynn Nelson, State of Texas, March 3, 2011. At the age of 24, Stephen Lynn Nelson entered North Point Baptist Church in Arlington, Texas, intending to rob it. Only Reverend Clint Dobson, 28, and Secretary Judy Elliott, 69, were present already. On parole for a prior assault, Nelson brutally attacked the victims. He beat Dobson with a computer cable before strangling him with a plastic bag. Elliott sustained severe injuries, including facial fractures and a brain hemorrhage, but survived after a long recovery. Nelson stole Dobson's laptop, Elliott's credit cards, and her car, using the cards to buy clothes and jewelry while selling the laptop for money. Police quickly identified him through fingerprints and blood stains on his shoes, leading to his arrest and conviction for capital murder. On February 5, 2025, Nelson was executed by lethal injection at Huntsville State Penitentiary. He was not granted a last meal due to Texas laws, but before the injection, Nelson repeatedly told his wife, Helen Noah Dubois, that he loved her and was grateful. He then added, "Enjoy life." As the lethal dose took effect, Nelson said, "I'm not afraid, I'm at peace, let's ride." His last words were love, before gasping twice and trying to catch his breath. He was declared dead 24 minutes later. Demetrius Taryn Frazier, State of Alabama, November 27, 1991. Demetrius Taryn Frazier broke into the apartment of 40-year-old Pauline Starks Brown in Birmingham, Alabama. After forcibly waking her up, he demanded money and sexually assaulted her at gunpoint. Despite Brown pleading for her life, Frazier shot and murdered her before stealing her belongings. His actions would ultimately lead to his conviction and execution. In March 8, 1992, in Detroit, Michigan, Demetrius Taryn Frazier attempted to assault 14-year-old Crystal Kendrick. He held her captive in an abandoned house, and when she tried to escape, he shot and killed her. Frazier was arrested shortly after in Michigan, where he confessed to both crimes. In 1996, he was convicted of the murder of Pauline Brown in Alabama and sentenced to death. In 2018, he chose to be executed by nitrogen hypoxia, an alternative method adopted by Alabama instead of lethal injection. The day before his execution, Frazier was offered a last meal and requested Taco Bell food, including burritos and a Mountain Dew soda. On the night of his execution, Alabama carried out his death sentence using this method, and he was declared Dead at 6:36 p.m., he became the fourth person to be executed in the state using nitrogen hypoxia. When asked for his final words, Frazier expressed remorse, stating, "First of all, I want to apologize to the friends and family of Pauline Brown. What happened to her should never have happened. I want to apologize." In 1997, James Dennis Ford invited Greg and Kimberly Mallory on a fishing trip in Florida. However, during the trip, he brutally attacked the couple. Greg was shot in the head with a .22 rifle and then struck with an axe. Kimberly was also hit in the head, sexually assaulted, and then murdered. Their 22-month-old daughter was left in the truck for over 18 hours, exposed and covered in her mother's blood. Ford was convicted of murder, sexual assault, and child abuse, with the brutality of the crime and the vulnerability of the child adding to the severity of his sentence. Despite multiple appeals, Ford's death sentence was upheld in 1999, and he remained on death row at Florida State Prison. The application of the death penalty in Florida had been inconsistent, with only one execution carried out in 2014 compared to 6 in 2023. However, in 2024, Governor Ron DeSantis signed Ford's execution order, signaling the end of a period of inactivity in the state. The day before his execution, Ford was offered a last meal and requested steak, macaroni and cheese, fried okra, sweet potato, pumpkin pie, and sweet tea. When asked for his final words, Ford said nothing. However, while strapped to the gurney, he wrote a message on paper that read, "Hugs, prayers, love, God bless you all." In November 2004, Richard Lee Tobler murdered Mohammed Ramuni, a nightclub manager, and his friend Zed. Tobler's brutal crime led to his conviction and subsequent execution. Further details of his execution and final statements will follow. In Texas, Richard Lee Tobler, alongside his accomplice Timothy Don Payne, lured Mohammed Ramuni with the false promise of selling him sound equipment. When Ramuni arrived at the designated location, Tobler and Payne ambushed him. They shot Zed first, and then turned the weapon on Ramuni, who was shot again as he was being dragged from the car. After committing the brutal double murder, Tobler stole Ramuni's wallet and other personal items from the vehicle. During this time, Payne filmed the entire crime with a video camera, capturing every horrifying moment. The following day, Tobler boldly called the police, admitting responsibility for the killings and threatening to commit more murders. His chilling actions didn't stop there. On November 28, 1992, just 2 days after the first murders, Tobler escalated his violence by murdering Amanda Benefield and Tiffany Loren, two teenagers who worked at the same nightclub as the previous victims. Tobler chose these two young women from a list of employees he suspected had implicated him in the murders of Ramuni and Zed. He believed they had somehow been involved in his capture or in exposing his crimes. His threats to the police continued, with Tobler making mocking calls, taunting the authorities, and promising further violence. His behavior only grew more erratic as he continued to flaunt his lack of remorse. Ultimately, Tobler was arrested and charged for murders. His brutal acts, paired with his relentless threats, led to his conviction and sentence to death. The gravity of his crimes and his continued threats created an unrelenting atmosphere of fear and anxiety for both the victims' families and the communities involved. After several years on death row, Richard Lee Tobler was executed in Texas on February 13, 2025. At the age of 46, the execution took place at 6:38 p.m., and he was declared dead shortly thereafter after receiving a lethal dose of pentobarbital. Tobler's execution marked the second of the year in Texas, and his final statement before his death became a moment of reflection on his actions. In his last words, Tobler expressed deep remorse, especially for the families of his victims, many of whom were present during the execution. "Not a day goes by that I don't regret my actions," Tobler said. "I had no right to take their loved ones. I ask and pray, I hope and pray that one day you find it in your hearts to forgive me for those actions. None of my apologies will bring them back. But I truly wish I could undo everything I did, his emotional apology to the families showed. A glimpse of the guilt that had haunted him in the years leading up to his execution, though it could never make up for the lives he had taken. The victims' families, who had endured years of grief and pain, could only reflect on the final moments of a man who had caused them so much sorrow.